Hey, so I wanted to come on and make another video about something that happened a couple of years ago that just stayed with me. So I was 5.5 months pregnant and I didn't know it. And it's a long story, but I did want to get it out because I want other people to know, other people who can get pregnant, that not recognizing that you're pregnant and going a while being pregnant and like having absolutely no idea is not like as rare as you may think, right? And I really judged myself for being pregnant for so long and having absolutely no idea, no clue. I experienced some symptoms, but I was able to explain them away. And there are other people who have had children before that actually end up getting pregnant again and having no idea that they were pregnant and actually will go like all the way until suddenly they're in labor. So I'm going to share my experience. I hope that all of you go into it, whoever's watching this, that you go into it with compassion and empathy, and that you take the time to understand my situation. Now, I'm going to give as much context as possible, but I do feel like I also just want to get through the story and I don't want to bore anybody. But there are a lot of details. So, pretty much. So let me start kind of from. So I was in rehab again. I had swallowed a bottle of pills. I was literally taken handcuffed to a gurney to the hospital where I was there, like they did a bunch of stuff and I was Baker acted, and from the psych ward I was sent to another treatment center, and it was like this whole thing. I didn't want to go. I was pretty much forced into it, and it was a whole thing. So, I went to rehab, and there I met a guy, and I have attachment issues, and I don't think this is only for people with attachment issues, but I'm definitely the kind of person that I meet someone and I can very quickly be like, he's the one, and that's pretty much what happened with this guy. We got out of rehab, we continued talking, and he just was not what I wanted, what I needed, what I was looking for at all, but I was trying really hard to make it work. Now, I was so unhappy. I quickly relapsed. I was having a lot of problems at home. I came home to a really bad situation, and I just was struggling a lot. And he didn't have a job. He didn't have a car. He was living out of a sober living facility, but he was lying to me, and he like relapsed, and like he lied about that as well, and it was just a mess. And he was very cold with me, and he just was not what I deserved at all. But at the time, I didn't really see it that way. I thought it was me, that I wasn't good enough, that if I just tried hard enough, that we can make it work. And so I didn't know how to get out of it. I used my eating disorder a lot. I used substances a lot, and I ended up cheating multiple times. Now, I'm not saying that that's okay or like whatever, that was the way to go about things. I don't think cheating, eating disorders, cutting, whatever. Like, I don't think that that's the route to take, and I think that this is going to kind of come up in this story a lot. When you're used to running away from all your pain, severe trauma, you don't just like wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm facing everything and I'm not, avoiding and everything is fine. That's not how it works. So even though I was trying to rebuild my life, I was still really struggling with this relationship. So one night I cheated with a guy that I used to hang out with when I was younger. I wasn't old enough to buy alcohol, and he was like in his like late 20s, and so he would hang out with me and would bring me alcohol, and I would do drugs and just get really messed up, and we would, hook up. And he was always in and out of my life. And so one night, I'm very depressed about my boyfriend, and he messages me, and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, we should hang out tonight, da 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 da." And I fell into it. I was like, this relationship, in my mind, my rationalization is like, my relationship with this guy isn't even going to work out anyways, so why not go out with this guy and just escape for the night, really was my mentality. So I went out with him. We met probably at like 10 p.m. or something at a plaza, an empty plaza that was like, everything was closed pretty much. It was like a weekday. And I got off work, I met up with him. He had a whole case of beers. I can't remember if I started drinking before I even met up with him. I mean, at this point, I was over 21, and it had been years, and it had been a long time since the last time I had seen him. And so he was the one who messaged me first, so I met up with him. To be clear, he's the one that messaged me. Not that like, absolves me of any accountability. So we met up, he has a case of beers, we got drunk. We're talking, got extremely drunk. We end up breaking into one of the offices in there. I mean, breaking in, like, the door, we were, like, going through all the doors, and one of them ended up being open. And so we were able to go in. That's not, like, breaking the window and going in, but, like, yeah. So we went in to this dark office, and there are desks everywhere, all next to each other, a bunch of cubicles and like whatever. We have sex, and he finished inside of me. I just remember at some point I was like, okay, where did you finish? Like, I'm confused. And he said inside of me. Or I think like I told him, I was like, did you finish inside of me? And he said yes. And I don't know, I mean, I was not sober, so I was kind of like, that's not a good idea, whatever, I'll deal with it tomorrow. I actually ended up going into the kitchen of that office, and I just started taking a bunch of food. Eating disorder, hi. So we take a bunch of food, I leave, I go home, I go to sleep, I wake up, and it sinks in like, okay, he finished inside of me, like, that's not, I should take plan B. I started messaging him. I'm like, hey, you need to give me plan B. Like, that was your decision to finish inside of me. Like, blah, 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 blah. I asked you not to because I'm, from what I remember, I had told him not to do that, So he was, like, kind of, like, being very, like, he wasn't really answering me very much, taking forever to respond. And I was like, hello, And finally, at some point, he answered, and he sent me the money, like, 2 days later. Now, my unhealthy mindset is like, okay, so he sent me the money 2 days later, like, plan B is less effective 2 days later, but it's still effective, it's just less effective the longer that it takes. So I just remember thinking, like, I could just use the money on, like, substances and food, was, like, my mentality. And so I did. In my mind, I'm like, I have an eating disorder. I barely get my period. I'm thinking I'm infertile. I'm like, I use substances so heavily. I'm so unhealthy. I'm not going to get pregnant. And time goes on. I continue dating this guy, and I actually ended up breaking up with him. And I remember I was like, that was really hard for me because I really didn't know how to get out of that situation. But finally, I ended things with him. I started a new job. I was making, some more money, and I was working a lot more. And one day, I'm on the toilet, and, like, things had began to feel weird, right? Like, I was experiencing different symptoms. If I would drink, I would throw up the next day, even if I only had, like, a couple of glasses of wine or something. Like, it wasn't anything like I wasn't drinking, large amounts or anything. And it was very weird to me. I did feel a lot of nausea. I remember before I got my new job, I worked at a Mexican restaurant, and, well, it was like these two white guys trying to, you know. Anyways, so the authenticity of this Mexican restaurant, but at the end of the day, it was this, restaurant, and I just remember, like, frying the foods and, like, stuff like that, and I would just be like, like, it just makes me nauseous smelling that stuff. But in my mind, I'm thinking, like, well, it's fried stuff and you're around it all the time, of course you're gonna find it, like, nasty now. And so then and then the one big craving, I've always loved pickles, but during this time, like, I was very, like, every restaurant that I go to, I'd be like, do you think I could get just, like, a side of pickles? Mind you, in my mind, like, let me just proceed. So one day I'm on the toilet and I get a bunch of vaginal discharge. I mean, something that you would think would come out of, like, a horse. Like, I was so confused. I've never seen anything like that before in my life. At this point, I'm starting to put together, like, okay, I'm experiencing a bunch of different symptoms. Pregnancy is not on my mind. I'm thinking it's, like, I don't even know what I thought. I thought it was, like, an STD or some kind of kidney infection. I don't even know. I had, like, so many different theories. Not pregnancy. So, right that night when I saw that on the toilet, I decided, okay, I need to go get tested for STDs, because at this point, like, I'm just freaking out. I get tested after work. That was probably, like, a Wednesday or something, or, like, I can't remember. Anyways, I get tested the next day, and then the following day after I got tested, I actually get an email saying, you need to come back, So I was like, oh my gosh, like, what happened, So I go back. Now, all my friends pretty much all of them have gotten an STD at least once. Like, some of them have gotten it multiple times. I hadn't gotten an STD yet. So I go in, and I had actually tested positive for chlamydia. That caught me off guard. I was like, oh, okay. So I thought that that's what it was. But they made me do all of the tests again, right? Like, blood, urine, like, whatever. And right after I finished giving another urine sample, I remember coming out of the bathroom, and there was a nurse, and she approaches me, and she's like, when was the last time you got your period? And I was like, I don't know, I have an eating disorder, I don't really get my period. And I was just very objective and, like, just honest. And she was like, okay, but when was the last time you got it? And I was like, I just remember thinking, I'm pretty sure my answer was, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago, or, like, over 6 months ago, something like that. And she looked at me and she's like, okay, because you're pregnant. And I remember looking at her, I was like, oh no, I'm not pregnant, that's not possible. Like, that was literally my response. I was like, that's not possible. And she looks at me and she's like, yes, we did an exam, you're pregnant, it's positive. And I was like, no, you have to test me again. That's, like, I'm infertile. I don't think you understand. And that was my thing. Like, one of my biggest fears about having an eating disorder was that I was permanently infertile, right? If you're not, and maybe this is just my own ignorance, but, like, I would not get my period. I very rarely would get my period. Like, sometimes I'd get some spotting. So, like, to me, I was like, there's no way I could get pregnant. That's not even possible. So I'm like, you need to test me again. Go back into the bathroom. At this point, I'm like, there's no way. Like, that's a false positive. I'm, like, thinking in my head. I'm like, no, she's wrong. I come back out. She does the exam, and she's like, it's positive, you're pregnant. At this point, another nurse comes over, because they're kind of seeing, like, okay, for one, she's starting to really freak out, and, like, hello, like, why? So I was just kind of, like, I started to get very emotional, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no way that I can be pregnant. Like, what? And they were like, well, have you been getting your period? And I was like, well, no, but, like, I never get my period. And they're like, nothing at all. And I was like, I've had some spotting sometimes. And I just remember one of the nurses looks at me, and she's like, yeah, that's how I found out I had my second kid, and that I was pregnant with my second one. And I looked at her, and I'm like, what? So at this point, they're like, well, you need to go into the other room so that they can give you the medication for chlamydia. I'm like, no. I need, like, abortion clinic numbers is what I need. I was set in my mind. I mean, you don't understand. Like, I am this young girl with a whole set of, like, serious problems, okay? And I'm just working to try to get out of them. And it's very, very hard for me. I'm pretty much starting from scratch right now. And you're telling me that I'm fucking pregnant. Like, I was set that, like, having an abortion was the right decision. Long story short, I end up, I don't even want to, because there was like a doctor there that was explaining to me the chlamydia medication, and I told him, I was like, I can't even think about this, like, I'm pregnant, and he was like kind of trying to talk me out of having an abortion, and I was like, no, like, fuck off, like, and he really should not have done that, especially like at the clinic that we were, at. I felt like it was very, he was pushing like family planning type of resources for me. Anyways, so I got really annoyed, and I just remember leaving with my medication, and I freaked out. I was like calling my brother and my best friend. I was like messaging so many people. I remember some people thought that I was lying, which was not cool. And I just remember, so the next day I go and I call Planned Parenthood, right? That's like my instinct. I was like, I don't even know what to do. I really had broken off my relationship with my mother, which has been one of the biggest things in my recovery that has really helped my recovery. That hasn't suddenly flipped a switch and now I'm just like recovered, but it helped me a lot because it was something really unhealthy in my life. So I decided I'm not telling my mom. Like, if I could get away with this without telling her, I will. Mind you, I was still I wasn't an adult. I mean, for me, I wasn't raised to be an adult, so it's been a really long process learning how to really take care of myself. So I do, I was living with her, so something to hide from her, and so I just remember I called Planned Parenthood the next day. I make an appointment for that Saturday because I was like so petrified of anything getting in the way of work. I go to Planned Parenthood with my brother and my best friend, and we go, and I go into the room, and I'm like, hey, like, I'm pregnant, and they're like, okay, we have to do an ultrasound first to see how far along you are. And I just remember she starts doing the ultrasound. I'm in there with my best friend because I was like, can she please be in there? They start doing the ultrasound, and the lady looks at me, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, I can't be very far along. I'm sure I could probably take, like, the pill or something, like the abortion pill that you could take, like, up to 10 weeks or whatever. And she's like, the abortion pill? No, you're far along. When I say I thought I was going to faint, she's like, hold on, let me measure the head. And I was like, oh my God. Like, mind you, I just remember looking at my best friend, and I didn't cry. I just looked at her and I was like, I cannot be a mom. She looked at me, she's like, you don't have to be, okay? Hold on. Like, let's hear, and thankfully she, like, helped calm me down, because in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, now I'm gonna have to be a mom. I'm so not prepared to be a mom. Like, I'm so unstable. I'm so messed up. Like, what? And so, she tells me that I am 5.5 months pregnant. And I really thought that, like, I was gonna have, like, a heart attack. So I have, like, a full anxiety attack. I completely freak out. I have a panic attack, and, I have a full-blown panic attack. I'm freaking out. And I remember she's like, the ultrasound's gonna cost $250. And I was like, $250? And I was like, just for the ultrasound? Like, that's absurd. And I'm like, just panicking, and not everyone there was that understanding. They were kind of very like, you shouldn't have done that. And I hated that. And that is actually, that happens several times throughout this story. And I just remember, so she actually waived the charge for the ultrasound, and they actually let me just get out of there free because she just saw how, like, freaked out I was. And I just looked at her and I said, is it possible for me to still have an abortion? Because my next thought was like, okay, if I can't have an abortion, I'm going to have to go to full term. I don't know how. I mean, I really didn't know how. I was planning suicide was really my next thought. But I really thought, like, if I, for whatever reason, wasn't able to kill myself and had to go full term, I was going to put the, baby, the eventual baby, up for adoption. I was like, I'm not going to be a mom. I'm not, like, not yet anyways, like, maybe one day in the future. But when in your heart of hearts, like, you're in no position to be a mother, you don't want to be a mother, like, you don't have the funds to be a mother, like, it just the whole thing, I didn't have anybody with me. So we get out. I remember, like, my brother was in the waiting room, and I'm like, come on, let's go. And so he's thinking, he's like, what, that's it? It's over? Like, you got the pill? And I was like, I'm 5.5 months. At this point, he's like, yo. And we're just in this, like, parking lot. And he's like, you're gonna have to tell mom. And I was like, no. And I was like, no. And I was just so sad. And I was like, how am I gonna do this? How am I gonna take care of this? So the lady had given me, she pretty much explained to me, she's like, there are only 2 clinics, you know, anywhere near here that will do it. One of them was very, very far, and the other one was maybe 20, 25 minutes from my house, something like that. And so I was like, okay. My first thing, we're still in the parking lot, I start calling one of the places closer to my house, and my first thing is like, how much for an abortion? And so they're like, how far along are you? And I'm like, 5.5 months. And they're like, that's going to be $3,000. And I'm like, $3,000? Like, I was like, I don't have that. And I'm like, just crying. And I'm like, dude, my brother and my best friend, they were going to help me out financially. But when I say it's $3,000, they're all looking at me like, yo, we don't, like, I don't know how we're going to do that. We don't have that. Like, we don't have that. And I just straight up told the woman on the phone, I'm like, I don't have that. So she was like, can you pay half? And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, look, come with as much, like as close to half as possible. Okay, come as close to it as possible. And your appointment will be, I can't remember if it was like a Monday or a Tuesday. I can't remember. This was a Saturday. So it was like, because this is a time sensitive thing. So then I have to, so I think it was like a Tuesday, because I think that Monday I had to go. And my instinct was like, okay, so I'm going to go to work. I'm going to lie to my managers. I'm going to say something like something's happening and I can't come to work for the next 2 days. However, my best friend really encouraged me to tell the truth. And she was like, look, I really think that they're going to be understanding. And you're going to be okay. Like, just tell them the truth. And I was like, I walk in there. I mean, I bursted into tears immediately. And they were thankfully understanding. You know, they were understanding, and they were like, we will give you the 2 days off. We won't tell anybody. The only people that will know are like us, you know, management, and just be safe. And we trust that you're making the right decision. So here comes Tuesday. I got as close to half as possible. I was still short a little bit, but that was a whole mess. I remember that day. So that morning, I put on my work uniform, and I just leave my house pretending I'm going to work. I get in my car, and I actually went to pick up my friend, and who my brother was dating. And she had actually also had been through the same thing. So and I'm very grateful that she was supportive, you know, and she was there for me because I didn't have to feel like I was the only one going through this. And somebody who I'm no longer friends with, and they're not even, like, worth mentioning or deserving of really anything. So we go there, we show up early in the morning, and it is pretty much a bunch of appointments, a bunch of paperwork. Like, you have to go into this room, then you have to go into that room, then you know, blah, blah, blah. And long story short, so I don't even want to bore anyone with a bunch of details, because I feel like some of it can be a little bit, you know. So I just remember, like, we're literally in there freaking hitting, like, a marijuana vape pen, because I'm freaking out, right? But I was scared to drink. I was like, I'm scared to drink. I don't know if that's gonna, thinning my blood is gonna probably fuck this up. I don't know, you know? So I was very, very scared. But so pretty much how they do it is, at the stage that I was at, what they do is, it's actually a 2-day procedure. That's why I had to take 2 days off. So how it goes is, they put something in your cervix, kind of like a tampon, okay? And how it goes is, it goes in your cervix, okay? And it begins to, like, kind of widen, to dilate the cervix, okay? He gave me an injection. It was a very long day. Very long day. And they gave me pain medication. And then I went home. And, well, I didn't go home. I went to my best friend's house that she was there with me at Planned Parenthood, and, she let me stay there. Now, they pretty much explained to me, and the doctor was very clear about this. He said, because you're further along, it is very possible that you may start to experience contractions at night, right? So one thing is cramping. Okay, cramping is like, it's going to hurt, whatever, but contractions is, it's going to hurt a lot for a moment, and then you're going to feel the release, but it's going to come back again, and it's going to be timed. You can time it. You're going to recognize that it's certain time that it keeps happening. Now, I'm there, right? I started to experience some pain, probably maybe I would say at like midnight. And so here's the thing, okay? I was raised in a neglected household, okay? I had lice for 6 years. I had an infection for over 10 years. I grew up in a house with fleas, with ants everywhere. I mean, I would literally sleep like slapping myself because I was so used to the environment. There would be tile missing from the floor, and it just was not good, okay? Come home to absolutely no electricity. It's Florida, it's really hot. I would have to sleep in the living room because there was no air conditioner, and honestly, it was probably hotter indoors than it was outdoors. But when you're used to living in things where you just kind of deny the truth and you avoid the truth and you just live in these circumstances, it's very easy for you to ignore symptoms, okay? I ignored my pregnancy symptoms until it was like something's really wrong that I could tell. And mind you, I felt really ashamed. I was like, how could you go this long without knowing? Like, what the hell is wrong with you? And I remember going online and researching, and how many people had actually the exact same story I had. People, like I said, who didn't know they were pregnant until they were going into labor. People who, it's the same thing, like you experience certain pains, but it's like you don't think it's pregnancy, I really had no idea, and I really judged myself for that. So that night, I really had the mentality of like, you have to go through this, you can't be a pussy, like you have to just toughen up, like, and I've always had kind of that mentality of like, don't cry, don't complain, like, just pull through, So that night when I started experiencing contractions, I was like, oh, it's not contractions. That's not what it is. It's in my head. I'm weak and I can't handle these cramps. I woke up several times in the night with very severe pain. And at first it was easier to avoid. I mean, I've been walking on an unhealed or like poorly healed fracture for at least 4 years. Like I'm telling you, this is a pattern. Like, so I'm like, these aren't contractions. These are not contractions. Like, no way. Pain becomes more unavoidable as time continues going on. And at this point, at maybe 6 a.m. or something, I call one of the people from the clinic, because they do have a 24-hour line that you can call if there's an emergency. So I call and I explain to her what's going on. And she was like, you're having contractions. I explained to you that if this happens, you have to come immediately. And she's like, you have to get here right now. So my best friend was actually going to go to work that morning, and my brother was the one who was going to pick me up from her house and then take me to the clinic again, so that they could, because first they have to dilate the cervix and do the injection, and then overnight it dilates, and then you come back the next day and they remove, So I remember having to call my brother, and I'm like, you have to come get me right now, and he's not having the world's greatest attitude, which he's not perfect, I'm not perfect, but at the end of the day, this was not the time to be so cold and rude, and he just was not being understanding, and he was rude about it, and he was tired and cranky and grumpy, and I was just like, are you fucking serious? I'm fucking in severe pain. By the time my brother gets in the car, when you can't sit still because the pain is so bad, Like, that's really how it was. I was moaning and, like, just, like, really, like, starting to get louder and, like, just, like, this really hurts, and I couldn't sit still, and it was the contractions were coming faster. Like, less time was in between them. So I go to the clinic, I get there, and pretty much it's like a bunch of, you know, chairs, and that's kind of the line. Like, it's like, okay, so there are, these people sitting here, you're gonna sit here, and then when the next person goes into the room, then everybody goes down, a chair. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, yo, how long is this gonna take? Like, I'm in severe pain. They're like, you gotta wait. So it starts to become worse and worse and worse. At this point, I'm like yelling. Finally, it's my turn to go into the room. And I think this was probably one of the worst moments of my entire life. It was probably one of the most painful things I've ever been through, if not the most painful thing I've ever been through. I'm laying there, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, like I'm freaking in the worst pain of my entire life, and there's no one here. When I told the guy who got me pregnant, when I finally was able to do the math and I recognized that it was him and he's the only one who finished inside of me, and it was literally like the timing, it was like that exact week. He was like pretty much the only person I had sex with, I think, that week, because I was going through something with the guy I was dating at the time, and so whatever the case was, it was definitely him, and so when I told him, he actually had blocked me, and yeah, he blocked me. So I didn't really have any help throughout this. I was completely alone. There were other couples there. There were other people who were also very emotional and sad. And, the nurses there were not very, patient. And it's a lot. It's a lot to go through. So when I'm laying on this, bed, and I'm waiting for the doctor to come in, and I'm yelling in pain, these nurses, they were like, so what do you do for work? And I'm like, I can't fucking talk right now. Like, are you kidding me? And I'm like in such severe pain. And they're like, well, if you may want to distract yourself, that might help. And I'm like, I can't be distracted from this. Like, this is like the most painful thing ever. I'm yelling. I'm like just thinking like, oh my gosh, like this is horrible, and it was probably one of the loneliest feelings ever. It's just very, very painful and very, like, I don't know, those moments in life where you just feel so much, you didn't know that life could feel that hard. And so it was a lot. It was certainly a lot. Finally, I just remember the doctor ran in. He grabbed the needle. He was like, quickly, I was like, just stuck my arm out so fast. I'm like, knock me out. I remember him injecting me, and I'm like, when is this going to end? Or like, when am I going to pass out? And he's like, probably like right about now. And my eyes closed, and I woke up, and I was back in another chair. And my first question was, is it over? And they were like, yes, it's over. And I was like, oh, and I felt really foggy. I felt out of it. I was confused, but also just glad that it was over. My best friend's boyfriend actually was picking me up because I had no one to pick me up. Everyone was working. Everyone was doing their own thing. And so he was the only one that could pick me up. And he drove far to pick me up. And I was really, really thankful. And, I expressed my gratitude towards him. And I really loved his response because he said, it's not every day you have an abortion, like, I didn't pick you up from, like, a random, hangout or whatever, like, you really needed it, you're having a surgical procedure. Now, we go home, I ordered us food, and I remember when he went to go pick it up, I just started sobbing, and I started crying, and I thought about everything, I thought about the whole situation, how I felt so alone, no one had talked, how no one had really, even though I had help throughout it, I really felt like I was hanging on to just, like, each thread of what I was given, like, it felt very, like, unstable, and I really judged myself for the situation that I had put myself in. I was very ashamed of myself, I was very hard on myself for it, like, how could you let this happen, and then with that person, and I didn't really know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with it. Like, I was just in the process of learning how to wake up every day, and now it's like I'm going through this very intense thing. And I think that just goes back to, like, I remember my therapist, she had told me, she was like, this is very hard to go through, and I understand completely, but you can either choose to grow from this or you can go straight back down the rabbit hole. And it was hard, it wasn't linear by any means, but I was able to go through it. I remember so many things that happened after that. It was very tumultuous. It was just like I would cry all the time. I just didn't know, like, how could this happen? How could I let this happen? With that being said, I'm going to stop the story here because there are just so many things that had continued to unfold, and, my life has been one big rabbit hole, to be honest. But I just want anyone out there who has ever been in that situation, who can get pregnant and realize that they were pregnant and, either felt guilty about being pregnant, judge themselves for, like, how could I let this happen? How could it go so long without happening? I just want to let you know that you are certainly not the only one. You are not the only one. These things do happen. You can take the right precautions and still run a risk. I know plenty of people that were on birth control and ended up getting pregnant, and so you don't have to feel so guilty and ashamed. And also just the importance of this procedure, and for people who are able to get pregnant to decide whether they want to go full term or not. I was so scared. I felt like my body wasn't my own, and I was prepared to attempt suicide. I was very prepared. I had the bottle of pills right there. I had them waiting for me. And I was like, if this doesn't work out, that is what I'm going to try. And I was very intent on it. I was like, I don't know what they're going to have to do to keep me alive. But when you feel like something's taking over your body like that and you don't want it, it's just very, like, unsettling. Doesn't even properly encompass the feeling that you really have, because you feel, honestly, I felt disgusted. I felt disgusted in my own body. I was like, ugh, like, I don't know, I just felt very disturbed. I felt disturbed. So, I'm very grateful that this is an option for people, and I really wish that it was more funded. I wish that that there was more compassion and more resources. I'm happy for the resource that I got. I know that that's really not the case all around the country and the world, and my heart really goes out to people who go through this, because I know so many people just think, like, oh, like, kids are a blessing, and it's like, it's not that kids are not a blessing, but I think that there are also other things to take into account, right? Like, and I think that kids may give you something to fight for. I won't deny that, and that can make people really happy, and it can really change your life. But when that's something that you don't want, and you're set on, like, no, you don't understand, like, I can't take care of myself. I used drugs during the entire, and I mean drugs, like, stacked on top of one another. I drank very heavily. I was very heavily in an eating disorder. I was cutting myself all the time. Like, I was just so not in the place to, like, be able to handle something like that, and I knew it. And I think that's why it's so important to ask the person who is pregnant, like, how do you feel about going full term? No one even, you could go full term and, give it up for adoption, but that doesn't mean that's something you want to happen to your body. You don't have to give up your body to something that you don't want, and you should be able to have that autonomy. So yeah, I hope that anyone who sees this, just understands, and yeah, if this happened to you or someone that you know, just offer support. I really say that that's the best thing that anyone could do, and I am very grateful for the people that really were there for me. I did keep it from my mom for a while, and then we got into a fight, and I told her, and she was very, very angry. That I think that's just kind of the relationship that we have always had. A lot of lying, secrets, denial, avoidance, like, lots of toxicity. So, yeah, I hope that everyone is doing well, and take care. Bye.